King George V reigned from 1910 to 1936. His reign spanned one of the most tumultuous periods in the history of Britain and the world at large, including the First World War, the Russian Revolution, and the interwar period. George's leadership during these critical events helped shape the future of the British monarchy, but it also marked a period of dramatic social, political, and economic change. Known for his steadfastness, duty, and moral integrity, George played a crucial role in maintaining the stability of the British monarchy, both during and after the First World War, even as the empire and the monarchy itself faced new challenges. Born on June 3, 1865, George was the second son of the Prince and Princess of Wales, Edward and Alexandra. His birth was seen as a moment of relief for the royal family, as the long-awaited heir to the throne, Prince Albert Victor, the eldest son of the Prince of Wales, tragically died in 1892. George, who was initially not expected to inherit the throne, was thus thrust into the role of heir apparent. Raised in the shadow of his elder brother, George's early life was marked by a lack of royal expectation compared to that of his brother. The sudden death of Albert Victor meant that George had to quickly prepare for his future role as king. George's education was standard for a royal prince at the time. He was tutored privately and trained in the arts of diplomacy and leadership. His upbringing was deeply influenced by his father, Edward VII, who became king in 1901, and George's close relationship with him was vital in preparing him for the challenges of kingship. Despite his royal education, George was not considered a particularly brilliant student. However, he was known for his strong work ethic and a keen sense of duty. These traits would serve him well in later years as he took on the role of monarch. His early adulthood was spent primarily in military service, which allowed him to develop a strong sense of discipline and leadership. He joined the Royal Navy in 1883 and spent a significant amount of time aboard ships, learning both the mechanics of naval operations and the importance of authority and responsibility. George's path to the throne was not direct. Following the death of his father, Edward VII, in 1910, George's elder brother, Albert Victor, had been expected to inherit the throne. However, due to the sudden death of Albert Victor in 1892, George became the heir apparent, and thus ascended to the throne as George after his father's passing. At the time of his ascension, George's reign was not greeted with universal acclaim. The public was largely unfamiliar with him, as he had spent most of his time focused on his military career and had not been directly involved in public affairs. His first challenge as monarch was to assert his authority in the face of increasing democratic reforms and the growing power of Parliament. George's reign would also be marked by one of the most profound shifts in British history, as the British Empire was beginning to experience decline, and the rise of new political ideologies threatened the existing order. George's early years as king coincided with the tumultuous years leading up to World War I. The complex web of alliances and tensions between the European powers, particularly in the wake of Germany's rising militarism under Kaiser Wilhelm II, was leading the continent to the brink of war. George was an active participant in diplomatic discussions, but his role as monarch was largely ceremonial. In 1914, the world would be irrevocably changed when World War I broke out. The First World War would define much of George's reign. Though the monarch himself had little control over the political decisions that led to war, he did play a central role in the moral and emotional leadership of the British people during the conflict. George's commitment to his country and his unwavering support of the British military helped maintain public morale during the difficult and long years of the war. During the war, George's reputation as a dutiful monarch grew. Despite his German ancestry, the House of Windsor was originally the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. He was deeply committed to the British cause, and he worked to distance himself from his German relatives. The war saw significant changes in British society, including the mobilization of entire populations for the war effort, and the monarch's ability to lead by example was crucial in maintaining public trust. One of the most significant events during the war was the renaming of the royal house. In 1917, in response to anti-German sentiment, George made the decision to change the royal family's name from the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to the House of Windsor. This was a move that helped to re-establish the royal family's ties with the British people and cement George's reputation as a monarch who was in tune with the changing sentiments of the nation. The First World War had a lasting impact on George, both personally and politically. The war led to the deaths of millions of soldiers and civilians, fundamentally changing the course of European history. For Britain, the war resulted in immense financial and human losses, and George was forced to navigate the difficult post-war period as the monarchy faced criticism for its handling of the conflict. Nonetheless, George's personal popularity remained strong, largely due to his leadership during the war. The aftermath of the war saw the decline of the British Empire, as many colonies began to demand independence or greater autonomy. The financial cost of the war had left Britain weakened, and the monarchy had to adjust to the new realities of a post-imperial world. George recognized that the empire was no longer the powerful global force it once was, and worked to adapt to the new international order. However, despite these challenges, the monarchy remained a symbol of unity and continuity during this period of change. The interwar years also saw the rise of political movements in Britain, such as the Labour Party, and George had to contend with the increasing strength of political parties and the decline of the power of the monarchy. Though George's political role was largely ceremonial, his leadership during times of crisis, such as the 1926 general strike, demonstrated his commitment to national unity and stability. One of the most significant events of George's later reign was the abdication crisis of 1936. Although George died in January 1936, his death set the stage for the crisis that would engulf the monarchy in the following year. His son, Edward VIII, ascended the throne upon George's death, but his decision to abdicate later in the year in order to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, led to a constitutional crisis that ultimately altered the trajectory of the British monarchy. George's passing marked the end of an era, and his son's abdication marked the beginning of a new chapter in British history. George had left behind a monarchy that was significantly different from the one he inherited. His reign had navigated through the horrors of war, the decline of the empire, and the pressures of political change. But it also solidified the monarchy's place as a symbolic institution that would endure through the challenges of the 20th century. King George's reign was one of profound change, but it was also a time of relative stability for the British monarchy. He helped to ensure that the monarchy remained relevant in an age of political and social upheaval, and his leadership during the First World War helped to cement his status as a symbol of national unity. George's reign also marked the beginning of the monarchy's evolution into a more modern, constitutional institution. He was a monarch who understood the importance of adapting to the changing political landscape, and his efforts to maintain the dignity of the monarchy during the trials of his reign ensured its survival in the modern world.